Today's episode is brought to you by Malwarebytes Premium Security. Protect your computers and devices from cyber attacks 24/7 with Malwarebytes Premium Security. And go to malwarebytes.com/lock and code for an exclusive offer. That's malwarebytes.com/lock-and-code.
For so long, there's been this idea that the data is the only thing that matters. It's about privacy, it's about data, it's about your data. What I realized is that people don't always care about their personal data so much. You know, there's these studies where you offer people a candy bar in exchange for their home address. And it turns out that people will sell their personal data and home address for the price of a candy bar.
This is Lock and Code, a Malwarebytes podcast. I'm your host, David Reese. Our main story today is about whether social media can be saved. Asking anyone about their thoughts on social media is like administering an ink blot test. Some people see a nice way to view photos of their grandkids or to stay in touch with friends around the world. Others see the earliest promises of the internet to connect people to knowledge and education and social movements and, of course, each other. And still others might see their livelihoods in building followers or in advertising their business to growing audiences. But other people might see something worse. They might see platforms that have been abused by nation-states to push disinformation campaigns, or manipulative algorithms that deliver revenue by fracking our attention spans, or unregulated spaces where gore and porn and hate speech work their ways hourly into the feeds of children. All of these are valid estimations, as social media platforms have become multifaceted billion-dollar operations that both connect and cut off their users, either from one another, or from resources, or from ideas that their owners find disagreeable. So, what would it take to make online connection a good thing? Today, to help us answer that question, we're speaking with one of the earliest architects of social media spaces, hired as Twitter's first employee, and now host of the podcast, Revolution.social. We're speaking today with Rabble. Rabble, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's happy to be here.
We are excited to have you here, and this is kind of a huge topic. I feel like we could go overtime immediately, but to refrain from that, let's dive right in. And like I said at the top of the episode, right, there's a lot of things going on with social media. It's depending on what way you want to look at it, what problems it has, but I think a lot of folks are aware of things like, hate speech, of disinformation, of bot activity, of like AI slop, of scams being, profligated online. And so I did want to ask just kind of really broadly here, with these known problems, why do you want to save social media?
I want to save social media because the dream of a world where we all have a voice, where we all can participate, where we all are part of the conversation. We're not passive consumers like we were in the era of cable and broadcast television. That dream is still alive. And when we were working on the initial creation of podcasting that pivoted to become Twitter, we had this idea that let's just solve society's problems by giving everyone a voice and by making it possible to have everyone a voice. Now, it did not solve people's problems. All it did was it changed the world, absolutely, but it created this way in which we are now all able to see all of these problems. And so I don't think that what we're seeing with social media is so much a set of new things that are disasters that are rising up from this Pandora's box of social media, but rather they are all things that existed in society and now they're not all kept locked away. So we can see them and we have to address them now.
What do you think is like the biggest problem of social media that has to be solved? Because again, there are like a lot out there and I don't know which one you choose, and I don't even know if it's one that we listed. So I did want to ask you, What do you think is its biggest problem? Because it sounds like you're saying here that it's, and I agree, there's a societal issue that has merely been shown a light on. So what is the biggest problem to you?
I would say that the biggest problem is the monoculture of social media platforms and apps. We've gone from a world in Web 2.0 20 years ago where there were many blogging platforms, there were many photo sharing apps, there were many ways of eventually doing video. And we ended up in this consolidation period where a few companies made a lot of money via ads on a few very targeted, opaque algorithms. These are the TikToks and the Instagrams and Twitters, Snapchats of the world. Then it became impossible to innovate. It became impossible to try new things. And we became very dependent on the decisions of these few people. Now, everybody could participate, but we couldn't explore the space of solving them because we had monopolies.
When you say that, right, we're kind of beholden to these opaque algorithms, I know that you were at Twitter. Did it feel like the company was being pushed into a certain direction to adopt this, advertising model, or did it sneak up on folks? I'm trying to understand where this did come from because it had to have come from somewhere.
Twitter was dragged kicking and streaming into the advertising business model. Twitter desperately did not want to have to use ads. It wanted a different model for how it is. And over the years, this was after I left, the company failed to develop any alternative to advertising. And so advertising happened as a last resort. And I've talked a lot with Jack Dorsey. I'm working with him on a bunch of projects at the moment. And what he said was, if I only had some other way of doing payments, if I only had some other way of compensating people of an economic model. And that's why he went to start Square and Block after he left Twitter, which was like the reason that he couldn't do something other than advertising was there was no way to make it work. And the funny thing is, early on in those days, I had a bunch of conversations with the Facebook folks. And so this was a time in which Twitter had just the chronological feed, and Facebook said, we're going to do algorithms. I had this conversation with David Ricordan, who's a senior executive at Facebook, and he's like, don't worry what you post to Facebook, post it all. Post all of the mundane. Give us every bit of data you have. Send us 1,000 posts a day, and our algorithm will figure out which ones are the important ones. And my mind was blown. I was like, holy cow, how are you going to handle this? What are you doing? And so that is the difference in philosophy. And the reality is that the Facebook model won. Like the Facebook idea of don't make the cognitive load of users to decide what to publish. The platform will do it for you. It worked and it scaled. And then we discovered that we shouldn't trust the platform for these things.
I wanted to go back to something you said earlier where, we did believe that giving everyone a voice would solve some things. And instead, it actually just brought to light some things. I wanted to ask, was there an inflection point where you realized that?
I think the inflection point for me was Gamergate. So Gamergate is this famous online kerfuffle where some women journalists in the gaming industry were being attacked for being too woke or being too diverse. And there was a big fight about what is the future of gaming, who's going to be for, and a community of gamers decided to engage in targeted brigading, grassroots harassment of these journalists and of these women game developers and queer game developers and journalists to try and drive them out of the space. And that was the first moment that it was like, oh, this swarming of crowds, this flocking behavior that we saw emerge on Twitter, which was when it was everybody finding a bar to go hang out in or discovering new music was amazing. But this same mob-like flocking behavior isn't always just we're doing amazing, cool things, but can be used to silence, can be used to attack people. And that was the first moment that I saw that this might go badly.
I also wanted to ask, kind of related to that, did you ever feel that creating a tool that connected these disparate parts, like these angry voices, did it feel really bad? Like, did it feel like, oh, what have we done?
Yes. I mean, I felt that a number of times. I sat down with a journalist in Peru. This must have been 2010, 2011. So like 4 or 5 years into Twitter's existence. She loved Twitter. She used it. She was excited about it. And then she said, I keep having these trolls. These guys keep showing up with new accounts and they keep harassing me and they won't go away. And Twitter can't make them go away. And it's driving me off this platform and it makes me feel very unsafe. And this is a very prominent journalist. She had the Peruvian equivalent of like The Late Show. I was like, oh, I don't know how to solve this problem. And I realized that her experience as a prominent woman was very different than my experience. And so the original Twitter team is almost all guys, almost all fairly privileged. We lived in San Francisco. We lived in this sort of progressive, well-to-do bubble of creativity and went to Burning Man and did all these things. Our experience is not going to be experience of this Peruvian journalist who's a woman who is facing harassment. So there was a moment where I was like, I don't know how to solve it. And then that thing that I saw where I was like, oh, this is a new way of organizing people. This is a new way of organizing society. And the social media platforms really had a hard time understanding how to address that and still haven't really figured out how to address it. We have now this sort of whack-a-mole thing of let's just ban terms and shadow ban people and manipulate the algorithm rather than addressing the underlying social dynamics that emerge once you create this tremendous ability to swarm. When Twitter first started growing, it felt like you could drop into being inside the global zeitgeist. It was like all of a sudden I can be inside this cacophonous global brain of everyone talking to each other. And you can see the conversations and participate in the conversations that before that were very disconnected. That was really powerful, but the platforms, we didn't ask to run this space. We said, what happens if you make it super easy to tell your friends what you're having for breakfast? That was literally what we were saying in the original tweets. It was like, it's raining, the coffee machine is slow. Hey, I think I'm going to go for a bike ride this weekend. Does anyone else want to go for a bike ride? They were very banal sort of things, but you got this feeling that you're sort of sitting on the shoulder. You had this parasocial relationship with your friends. You could sort of see what was going on the top of their mind as they went through their day. And the original idea was that there wouldn't be celebrities. At one point, Twitter had a scaling problem and you couldn't have more than 3,000 people follow you.
Oh, wow.
And once you got to 3,000, you had to block someone for someone new to follow you. But initially we were like, I wonder if this will be useful for celebrities. I wonder if anyone famous would like to have a parasocial relationship and it wasn't just your friends. And we sent this guy, Adam Rugel, who's on the team. We sent him down to Hollywood, and his goal in Hollywood was to find a celebrity to use Twitter. So it's 2007. Adam bravely, hops on a plane from San Francisco down to LA, goes around, tries to find anyone who will talk to him. And the first Hollywood celebrity we could find who was willing to use Twitter was the assistant scriptwriter for My Name is Earl, who's a very funny person.
Yeah.
And definitely worked well on Twitter. But every other person who was a more prominent celebrity had this thing where they're like, well, if I do this, my PR people are going to be upset. It's like, I'm not curating my message. I'm not operating through the machinery of the publicity machine. Then over time, after many, many failed attempts of getting people like the scriptwriter, people realized there's real power in being able to present more of your whole self and being able to share your thoughts and to be able to participate in these conversations. And you don't need to operate through gatekeepers. And the whole point of what we were building was building social media so that we don't have to operate through gatekeepers. And it was a really amazing moment, which we lived directly in transparency. And then the transparency got too much. There were too many posts, everything else. And we're like, oh, maybe we need some algorithms to filter this stuff. And so we built new gatekeepers.
I think that points to something you were saying earlier about Facebook, how you were told, oh, we're going to build these algorithms. People can post everything, like every single thing, and then the algorithm will sort it out. And you said, learning from that years after, we learned to not actually trust the platform. I wanted to ask more about that. Why shouldn't we trust the platforms?
First and foremost, we shouldn't trust the platforms because we have strong evidence that they have lied. They have lied over and over and over again. When Facebook decided that they wanted to have videos because video ads perform very well, they went to media outlets and they told the media outlets, hey, we want you to make videos instead of just writing text.
Yeah.
Because the media outlets, mostly they're journalists, they write. Facebook had discovered that if you're watching a feed of videos, you're much more likely to be engaged with an ad. A video ad is so much more compelling than a text-based ad. So instead of just promoting videos, Facebook actually manipulated the viewer numbers on the videos that they had the media outlets, the news outlets publish. So the news outlets thought they were getting millions of views and they were getting thousands of views. And that is a fundamentally dishonest behavior, and it contributed to the gutting of journalism worldwide.
Yeah.
But we had obviously there were think pieces and there were outrage pieces and opinion pieces and people were upset and, Zuckerberg was hauled before Congress over it, but there was nothing we could do when they behaved poorly. And so that is the problem, is that there's tremendous economic incentive on these big platforms' parts to play to the hand of the dealer. Mm-hmm. They're the house in the casino and they get to control the rules, but there's no regulatory oversight about how those rules work. And so we now know that if you have no transparency and no accountability and no viable alternative, the exit vote loyalty thing, then they're going to abuse their relationship and power. And so that fundamentally is why we need to have a diversity of things. That's why I say that, the solution isn't just fix the algorithms or age verification or this particular kind of regulatory oversight. The real solution is create a business environment where Facebook and TikTok, and to a lesser degree, Twitter and Snapchat, have economically viable competitors. And not just one, because right now we have this duopoly, but many of them. And then when one of these platforms behaves poorly, it's very easy to leave with your users, leave with your content, leave with your attention, and move to another. And we've seen these exoduses happen before. Vine was the dominant video app for many, many years. And the Vine creators didn't like that Vine, the company, Twitter, which owned Vine, wasn't paying them for their content. And so they went to YouTube and Instagram, who did offer to pay. And so that was a moment where the exit was possible. And today we have a kind of regulatory capture thing where we can't trust these platforms anymore.
You've mentioned here a couple of things that need to happen for this environment to be fixed. And one of them, like you said, obviously here is, right, there need to be competitors. Like there needs to be a world in which competitors exist. And then there also needs to be a way to viably jump to those competitors, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you've addressed some of these issues with two kind of proposals you have here. You've had the Social Media Bill of Digital Rights, which you've written about, and you've also spoken a lot about different technologies that we will get into, but I wanted to focus on the Social Media Bill of Digital Rights, just really broadly here. What is it? Like, what's in there?
That's a great question. So for so long, there's been this idea that the data is the only thing that matters. It's about privacy, it's about data, it's about your data. What I realized is that people don't always care about their personal data so much.
No.
There's these studies where you offer people a candy bar in exchange for their home address. And it turns out that people will sell their personal data and home address for the price of a candy bar. For $10, you could probably get their social security number to a stranger walking on the street. And although those of us who pay lots of attention to privacy and security think that's crazy, I really thought we just need to stay aligned with human nature. And so I said, well, what should we be demanding? If we want a better world, what should we be demanding? And I tried to condense it down into something like the memorable way in which the Free Software Foundation has this freedoms of free software, the right to copy, the right to use it for any use, the right to redistribute it, that kind of stuff. And I said, well, these are the fundamental rights that anybody who is building or using these social media apps should use. And that's, you should have the right to privacy and security. Can you use these things without surveillance and securely? You should have the right to ownership. You should own your own name. Because right now on Instagram, you might think you own your Instagram name, but they could take it away and give it to someone else. Your identity, and that includes the right to be like, I want to delete my stuff. You should have the right to interoperability, which means these platforms should not be walled gardens. And if I want to leave one to another, I should be able to. And you see this in the way Substack works. If you're a publisher on Substack and you want to move to Ghost, Substack lets you keep your Stripe payments. They let you keep all of your emails, that you own your domain name. Like Substack doesn't own your relationship with your audience. And I think that's very important. That's part of the thing that will give us accountability. You should have the right to algorithmic transparency and control, meaning that they're going to be algorithms, but can someone see, how the algorithms work, what it's optimized for, and have a say into it? And lastly, you should have the right to some sense of self-governance. You should have the right to decide what the moderation rules will be for your community. If you join a bowling league or a homeowners association, you have the right to transparency about the league association rules. You can stand for election to be on the board. If someone misbehaves, there's a process where you can report them. But in the big social media platforms, they're operating at a scale that your account gets deleted and you don't know why. This is a violation of terms of service. So I put together these sets of rights, and you can see them at rights.social, because I was looking at projects that we've been working on, including helping kick off the launch of Blue Sky. And people didn't understand, well, what makes Blue Sky or Mastodon or Nostr or these sort of other open alternatives, what makes it different from Twitter, from Threads, from Facebook, from Instagram? And there's lots of ways in which you could argue the technical differences between them. But I thought these fundamental 5 rights of social media, these are the things that should distinguish between the world we want and the world we have.
You mentioned that the first one there would be a right to privacy and security. And look, we're a cybersecurity company, so it feels too good to pass this up. But would any of the, let's call them like the big 5, Twitter, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, do any of those fulfill a right to privacy and security for users today?
They don't, but they don't necessarily in a way that's interesting. Meta does a great job of protecting your privacy from other people on their platforms. Like if you look at Instagram's privacy settings and the way they work and the defaults, it is really good at the privacy from one user to another. But if you are a paying client of these, or you are part of the company platform, then they have access to all of this data and they will use it in ways that aren't aligned with you. And so you got to acknowledge that they are meeting some people's needs and providing some privacy and security between sets of users, but they're sort of the all-seeing overload of it.
You also mentioned here this sort of algorithmic transparency, and it sounds like a right to choose what algorithm is fitted onto my social media feed. I just want to make sure I'm getting that right, and also asking, Do you think people would engage with that? Because it feels like a high bar, and I would engage with it, right? But I would also argue I'm not a typical user. And so I wanted to ask what that was a little bit more, and also what the engagement rate would be.
Sure. So that's a great question. The truth of the matter is this is a technical podcast. A lot of people build software. We know that no one ever changes the defaults settings.
Yeah.
So the defaults matter a lot. And I think that initially it seemed like a high bar. And I built some systems where we provided algorithmic choice and no one choose anything. But we do see some examples in the Blue Sky ecosystem where there's a Blue Sky company. They make the platform. It's an open protocol. It's open source technology, but Blue Sky runs their own servers. This guy, Rudy, he's a black man, lives in New York, and he's like, these, Seattle-based white hippies, they don't respect my values. I'm going to make my own algorithms. And so he made it something called Black Sky. He made a set of algorithms that optimized for Black voices. It didn't just get 2% of the users, but it has millions of users. Millions of people said, I want to use Blue Sky, the social media ecosystem, but I want the Black Sky algorithm. And they're separate organizations, but they worked in a way to expose and show and communicate and make it easy to choose. We see people being very frustrated with algorithms. That's why they're very frustrated that you can't choose just who am I following versus for you. That's a kind of algorithmic choice. In the Blue Sky ecosystem, it's the first time we've seen at scale people doing this. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of algorithms you could choose from in Blue Sky. Most people use the big ones provided by Blue Sky, the company, or Black Sky, or a couple other things. There's definitely a power law going along here. But because you can easily choose from Blue Sky to Black Sky, if Blue Sky does shitty with their algorithms, people can easily leave and choose an alternative. And that holds Blue Sky to account.
I didn't know that. I didn't know about the Black Sky algorithm. I think that's so a really good concrete example of having something that shows you something different. I don't know. It's hard to even put words around it, but it is the thing. It's the thing of I want to see different things and I trust this algorithm. And if I don't like it, I can just adopt a different one. It's very nice and novel to see. I wanted to move on to now the technology that allows this to happen and the examples that we have. And so I'm going to ask you about something that I think some listeners definitely have never heard of. And that thing is called the Fediverse. And so what is the Fediverse? What does it do? Is it an improvement? Help me understand at the most basic level. Again, what is the Fediverse?
The Fediverse is a federated network of mini Twitters or mini social media apps where you can set up and you can run your own server, you can provide your own moderation, your own tools, and people could register the account on your server. But instead of being an isolated thing of every being on your own server, they connect between them. So that's the federation part. And the Fediverse comes out of an effort in 2012 where Twitter had been very open. So anybody could register an app, they could build their own apps, and most people used Twitter through some third-party app like, TweetDroid or Twitterific or TweetDeck. Twitter ran the servers, but the experience was controlled by all of these different developers. And Twitter said, oh, I don't want this. I'm going to shut all this down, prevent the third-party developers from building their own thing, and do it because Twitter wanted to control the ad experience for revenue models. And so the developers of these apps, they're like, oh my God, turns out that I actually had no control over my relationship to my users. And people said, well, how would we build an alternative? And so there's an app called Mastodon, which is sort of the biggest and most famous app in the Fediverse, which says, here's a Ruby on Rails app. And Twitter itself was a Ruby on Rails app in the early days. And I can just install my own little teeny version of Twitter. The truth of the matter is we built Twitter in a day. We got up at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in mid-February 2006, and we said, let's just do a hackathon. Everybody throw some ideas out on the whiteboard, And Jack was like, I think I want to do a status update thing with like text messages. And by 6 p.m., we demoed it. And it sort of worked. It took a couple more months until it was coherent enough to be able to launch. And so what Mastodon is saying, well, look, Twitter initially did just fine at the scale of dozens of users, or even thousands or hundreds of thousands of users. And so Mastodon lets you run your own little Twitter where the people running the servers get to decide what content should and shouldn't be displayed and what kind of content and which apps can connect to it and who is hosting your data and what algorithms you should have. Instead of having just one big server that everybody is dependent on the server making the decisions, in the Fediverse, there are many of them.
When you said that, right, the Fediverse is also this connected network of apps, and you mentioned it was social media apps. I just had a super basic question. Is it only social media apps?
I mean, the question is, what is social media? Because podcasting is social media, Wikipedia is social media. There are all sorts of apps that are on the Fediverse. There's collaborative writing apps that work like Medium. There's Google Docs-like apps that for editing and sharing documents. There's something like Google Drive. There's sort of every considered kind of social app that you can consider. But most of what people use it for is text and photo and video. Most of it, what they use it for is something very similar to Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
I have to ask because, what a fun question. Like, what is social media? I just have to ask because it sounds very fun. What isn't social media in your view?
What isn't social media? It's hard to figure out the line of what isn't social media because we are social creatures. Humanity is fundamentally defined by our relationship and connection to community and other people. Now, not all primates are like this. If you look at orangutans, they're very close relatives to us, but they mostly live isolated lives. They don't live in tribal communities. They go off and they jungle and they get together and they mate and they have kids and they go off and they disappear and they mostly live all alone. But humans, the worst form of torture for a human is isolation. If we want to torture someone in a really cruel way, we put them in a room all alone and don't let them talk or see anybody else. We know that there's tremendous psychological damage from that. So the question is like, what is not social media? I would say things that aren't social media is any kind of media communication or technology where you don't have the ability to contribute. Now, your contributions might be a like, it might be a repost, it might be a sharing, it might be creating your own content. It might just be as simple as your own viewership patterns shape the viewers of others through the algorithms. But where we are agencies and we are part of something, as opposed to passive consumers. So was cable television, broadcast television, radio, the novel, these are all social media, they're just less social.
Yeah, like the novel becomes a social media when you have a book club,
Exactly.
I wanted to also ask about these, you mentioned an app like Mastodon. I wanted to also understand how populated are these apps? Like how populated are the Fediverse apps compared to the big five? And also in that question, should the number of users even gauge quote unquote success of a platform?
The number of users is such a fascinating thing because it matters on some level. And on other levels, it doesn't matter at all. The Fediverse, Mastodon, and Friends has roughly 10 million users, and 1 million of them are pretty active. Blue Sky at this point is about 3 or 4 times bigger than that, 35 to 40 million users. Threads is 300 million users. But, Facebook is sort of pumping the numbers by including all sorts of links to threads where you can't see the end of the actual thread message unless you click through. You see it in Instagram and they entice you to click through. But what we also know is that the influence or importance of these platforms aren't in direct proportion to their user numbers. I have a friend who runs a website called NeoCities. And if you remember way back in the day, there was a personal website app called GeoCities where you could make your own homepage.
Yeah, definitely.
Kyle's like, wouldn't it be cool if we had GeoCities again? Because Yahoo shut it down a long time ago. And so Kyle went and rebuilt GeoCities. It's called NeoCities. You can go there and you can make your own homepage. And it looks exactly like late 90s garish web design. Millions and millions of people use NeoCities. Tens of millions of people. It is a massive website. It has almost no impact on global culture. It has no, it just exists for the people who are there. It exists for people who are into it. It's wonderful. He runs it. He has one trust and safety sort of support person, the two of them that run it. It's great. It's a teeny business. It's wonderful for people to participate. It has no impact on the rest of the world. And then there's other things that have teeny little sets of users, but have huge impacts on the world. Mm-hmm. Like 4chan, which is deeply problematic in so many ways, but is also the source of a huge amount of internet slang and internet culture and internet memes and political movements of all stripes. And so there are not many people who use 4chan, but they have a huge impact on the world. And so the numbers don't matter so much as the way in which the social dynamics and effects on how we're interacting. And so I think it's disingenuous just to say, well, these are the important ones because they're bigger. The other one was I spent a little time after I left Twitter working at Yahoo. I worked with the Flickr team and some other folks at Yahoo. And I had a conversation with Yahoo's team that was running Yahoo Mail. And the Yahoo Mail people are like, oh, well, we have 100 million people in Yahoo Mail and Gmail has 1 million people. Gmail's not important. Clearly, 100 million people chose to use our product. 1 million people chose to use Gmail. And I tried to explain to the Yahoo Mail people, yes, but the million people who are using Gmail, those are the early adopters who see where the future is going, and they're influencing other people around them. Whereas the Yahoo Mail people predominantly were rural and suburban women in middle America. They had a lot of them. They made a lot of money from them because they didn't know what an ad was or not. But you could see, even at the point at which Yahoo Mail was 100 times bigger than Gmail, that eventually the two will pass because of the way in which technology has these sort of cascading effects of adoption. And so it's more important to see the rate of change and who is using something than the absolute numbers.
I know that because I think a lot of folks haven't used these apps, and I think the familiarity with them is low. I think a lot of folks might be thinking, okay, do these apps solve the problems that we spoke about earlier? Things like hate speech, things like harassment campaigns. And it's an odd question, right? To say, do the apps solve the problem? Because we've been talking a lot about how, all of this is about not, an app not having ownership. But I still have to kind of frame the question that way, right? So do these apps solve those problems?
So my college roommate, who is now SVP at Adobe, Kellen Elliott McRae, he runs Frame and Premiere, and he's a senior executive at Adobe. He always said that his entire career is creating technological solutions to social problems. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think we are asking technologists to build technological solutions to these social problems. I mean, yes, technology is part of it, but it's a social problem. So it needs a social solution and not just a social media solution.
How do these apps allow for this? I don't even know what I'm asking here, right?
So there is the question of
yes,
in these apps, do we have agency to make a social solution? And this is part of why I am so excited about what Rudy and the Black Sky folks are doing, is because they went and said, hey, what if instead of complaining to the platforms about the way in which Black people are being treated and the way in which racism happens, what if we were able to put together a team of Black moderators who understood Black American culture and could decide what content our users saw and how it was labeled and how it was prioritized. And they were able to use the technology to run their own system. And so they have 8 people who are moderators who get to decide what content is and isn't in their world and how it's being labeled. I think it's amazing because I shouldn't be deciding whether or not that's an appropriate or inappropriate use of the N-word.
Yeah, true.
That is not my place as a white guy. But I want to build a system where the community that cares about it, the community that's affected about it, can enforce it. So the technology part of it is building the tools that let the social solutions exist. We're starting to see that. Like, we're starting to see some hints of that. And it's amazing because we knew this problem 20 years ago, but we didn't know how to build the technology to make it work. Now we're starting to see that.
I like this idea here of like, even I'm going to follow this naming convention, right, of blue sky and black sky, because I know that a lot of parents, particularly in the past week, have been very upset about, their kids' Twitter feed or Instagram feed showing an assassination. And I completely understand. And I think there is something novel here of creating a quote unquote parent sky or kid sky or something like that, right? Where again, the folks who are most affected, who are most in this world, have the power to make those decisions. And yeah, it just sounds very novel. That's all.
And the funny thing is that it's not novel at all. Like, this whole concept goes back to the disability rights movement from the 1960s and 70s, where a bunch of people who were disabled, crippled was the term they used at the time, said nothing about us without us. I would love a world in which a group of parents could get together and decide and create a social media platform that fit their needs for the content for themselves and their kids. Now, I don't want the state to go say everybody has to follow this, because that is so easily corrupted. But if we could build an ecosystem by which each of these communities could decide this. And there's North Sky, which is a queer community's LGBTQIA+. There's a group starting one out of ex-Al Jazeera people called Arab Sky, which would reflect Arab values and prioritization. This is a future in which we are able to build digital worlds and digital norms that work like our physical world, our physical communities.
I want to close on a pretty big question here. It's very much related to some of the work we do here at Malwarebytes, and it's something I've found, right? There's this annoying wall that I hit a lot in my own work in advocating for like online privacy. And that wall is that I have found that some people like surveillance. They enjoy it. They enjoy targeted ads, which maybe they don't see as surveillance, but surveillance is kind of required for it. But they also just really enjoy location tracking, like location tracking their significant others. They see it as a sign of like maturity in a relationship. And that's something I can't untangle for them. And my question here then is, look, if I've been wrong about stuff like this, is there a world in which we're wrong about stuff like community building online? And so my question is, what if people want to be passive consumers of social media?
Most people are passive consumers of social media. The vast majority of people on all social media platforms have never posted a single thing. The vast majority of people have never liked something, they've never reposted, they've never shared, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying, I have nothing to say. I just want to observe. I want to be a lurker. I want to be a wallflower in this. Just like there's nothing wrong with the way in which young people today do always on full-time location sharing with their partners and their close friends. If you look at teenagers today, they'll use Find My Friend and they'll leave it on for their whole friend group. And it's a part of creating intimacy within that group. And, sometimes problematic things happen, but they're able to choose that. They're able to choose, who do I share this stuff with and how do I show intimacy with these other people? And there's a difference between, I want to show intimacy with my partner, I want to show intimacy with my friend groups, I want to feel safer when I'm sharing my location with my parent, and situations where you are forced to do it. And there's some complicated power dynamics going on there. Other situations where there are these SDKs that get put in all of these free apps for advertising that are actually doing location harvesting, that are sending it off to data brokers that are then selling that data to Palantir and ICE or to all these advertisers or to stalker apps. There's a real difference between I'm sharing my location with my friend group and my location is being sold to all these people without my knowledge. The selling of your location without your knowledge, that is a terrible thing. The ability to choose that you want to share this kind of intimacy that older people would balk at, that's fine.
If there are a large group of people, like you said, most folks who want to be passive consumers, like, is that a wall to getting people to join these social media apps? You know, like, in other words, like, is it possible to build a community for a disinterested public?
I think it's dismissive to say that they're passive consumers. These are people who are choosing to have a parasocial relationship with other people. They're choosing to view and follow a kind of gossip, but we dismiss gossip. We dismiss reality TV shows. We dismiss soap operas, all these things as not being of agency, not being important. But if you think about it, understanding the social dynamics of the community you're in, the village, the tribe, that's the most human kind of social regulation. Now, the trick is now it's not just with the people around you, but with all these sort of real, but to you, imaginary people you're having a parasocial relationship out in the world. And we need to discover and understand the way that works. But I don't want to judge people for enjoying reality TV. I don't want to judge people from watching this stuff. And I think that it gives people pleasure in their lives and they should do it. And I think that when we build social media platforms, we should celebrate the people who are the creators, because that's the sort of conveners that bring people in, but not dismiss the people who are passive consumers of this stuff either, because a theater without the audience isn't as much fun.
Yeah, I definitely use the word passive consumer here, not in judgment, but more so in like what I would call the default user who will not find algorithmic choice appealing. And so the question really is like, well, like if these things are so good, how do we get people to them? You know, like, are they successful just because they give choice?
No, they have to be successful because there's something interesting there. I think that you get people interesting things there because the creators, every single creator I've talked to is desperate to get the audience they have built on these platforms onto a platform that they can have a more direct, controlled relationship with their audience. They want to move them off of Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter and onto their Substack, onto their newsletter, onto their OnlyFans if they're an adult creator. They want to move them into a place where they have agency. And so the trick is building a place and a set of tools and an environment where people can move. And some of this might be related to government regulation. This is the kind of thing that we might see the European Union do, which is implement a GDPR-style law, which is you have a right to exit. You can leave with your followers. That would be a great thing for a government to implement. Or a law which said you have the right to easily choose an alternative app store to install your apps, or an alternative payment system so that Apple isn't taking 30%. Like, these are things that government regulation would do that would help creators exist outside of the big centralized platforms. And if they are able to viably exist inside and outside those platforms, then we will see that the audience is able to move. But right now, you can't put a link on Instagram. You can't put a link. You know, I see these Facebook posts where news organizations are posting articles and they post a photo of the article in the summary, and then they can't post a link to the articles because if they put a link into the article, Facebook won't share it. And so then the first comment is a link to an article. That is a terrible, terrible design pattern. That is making the internet worse for all of us.
Rabble, I just wanted to thank you again for coming on today's show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you've been a fantastic interviewer. So thank you so much.
To our listeners, we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Until then, stay tuned and stay safe. And remember, you can read all our cybersecurity coverage on Malwarebytes Labs at malwarebytes.com/blog. Finally, our intro music is by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com, and our outro music is by Woa from unminus.com. Today's show has been edited by our podcast consultant, Eric Johnson, at lightningpod.fm. Thank you, folks.